Okay. With regards to our Design a Boat Challenge for our STEM activity, let's see.
So we did a STEM boat activity. They had to design a boat using a piece of aluminum foil that would hold pennies, and they had to see first if their boat would float, and then how many pennies the boat would hold if it floats.
And I noticed that you did a lot of pre-activity with the videos and the books that you read, and even your chart, so that to make sure the children understood the technology, or at least the language, which I thought was a little bit challenging because they had to understand the term buoyancy, and that's a pretty tough term for kindergartners.
Mm-hmm.
And there was concern that some students, very few students, understood the sinking part, or why a boat would sink.
Mm-hmm.
And the modeling of the boat was, which you provided for the students, was very appropriate. But not all students had the dexterity to make a boat out of aluminum foil, and aluminum foil is not very forgiving for kindergartners.
No, it wasn't at all.
So, but what you did, I felt, was appropriate. I thought the activity was a little bit high-handed for kindergarten.
Yes, that's why I did a lot of background knowledge. We read the book, and we watched a video on buoyancy, and we learned about the words, and we talked about what they thought sinking and floating meant, and I had built a lot of background knowledge before we even tried to start, because I thought it was a bit challenging for the class before we even started.
I agree. You can, I do understand it was a K2 skill for the students, and I understand the students don't get STEM on a daily basis. Their science and technology is not usually that technical or that hands-on, actually. And it's not performed in the lab. It's usually something you're performing in the classroom without the aid of the STEM teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So you're left a lot to figure out. Even your videos, your books, you were left to figure them out, even though you're not even always provided with
I was only provided with basic directions on what they had to do, and it was basic directions. I had to find the videos and the book and how to build the background knowledge, and I had to really think about how could I help these students to understand what they're doing, because like I said, I picked the K2 easier version challenge, which still wasn't the easiest challenge.
But you are provided with the tools, the aluminum foil, the pennies.
No, I was not this time. I provided it this time. The first STEM challenge we were, but I provided it this time.
Okay, so even though that's problematic, you're not provided with the use of the lab, you're not provided with the tools all the time, you're not provided with the materials, and you're not provided with the space, not provided with any of the assistance, not the training, and background knowledge is something you're responsible for finding for the students to master the skill or content attainment for the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And even the lesson plan was not something you find, it's provided to you, and not always at the level for the students to master the skill for the task.
Right. Because within my classroom, I do a lot of differentiating anyways based off of what my other teachers do because of the students in my classroom. So I was just provided a basic lesson plan that kindergarten, first, and second grade teachers used when I normally have to differentiate anyway. So there was a lot that I had to provide for myself, for my students to even be able to try to accomplish the task.
But I noticed that in the class you did model with the paper prior to giving them aluminum foil.
Mm-hmm.
You did direct instruction for vocabulary, providing them visual and auditory skills for the vocabulary. And then, like I said, you had the books and you had the videos, the Brain Pop Junior and the 2 books prior to the activity. Then you had the question and answer for the children to express their knowledge of and understanding of what is sinking and what is floating, so that could show their understanding, which would allow you the opportunity to continue building background knowledge or to move on to the next step.
Mm-hmm.
Although your day was broken up, unfortunately, with pumpkin seed activity.
Mm-hmm.
For some students, the retention of what you talked about prior to the pumpkin seed activity may have been lost.
And we came back and we revisited what we had talked about in a shorter version so that we were back to the boat challenge.
Because that was kind of a very wild day.
Yes.
Especially for kindergarten, especially for students with disabilities or learning challenges. It prevents them from focusing on a task.
Mm-hmm.
For such an expanded day, they started at 7:40, 8 o'clock-ish, and that went pretty much 3-4 hours into your day
Mm-hmm.
for them to... so perhaps an activity that's not as long, not as detailed, not as challenging, with less challenging vocabulary would have been better. Just which of these items will sink and which of these items will float would have been better than counting the number of pennies on an aluminum foil boat before it floats. Might have been a better task, which would be something to talk about with your STEM. But I know at this point you're trying to get certified, so there may be specific requirements that you have to do at this time. But in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Why it keeps getting dark and light?
I don't know.
So there were several problems with the activity because of the lack of input from the grade level before the task was chosen, the lack of supplies for all the grade levels, the fact that some of the classes have higher ability students than your classroom. You guys got this how many days in advance?
We got it a couple of weeks in advance.
Okay.
So I had time to prepare. I had to prepare. I had to take my own time to prepare for it.
Okay. And it's not like you can prepare boat building with tools you didn't get
Mm-hmm.
and tools you expected to pay for.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't, you're fine. It's expected to pay for out of pocket. Something else you should maybe consider in the future that if you're going to do STEM activities, they provide materials for you. Or that they're non-consumable materials, something that can be reused.
Mm-hmm. For example, like if we would have been able to do the what sinks, what doesn't, what
Yeah.
sinks, what floats, those objects might have been able to be reused at a later time.
Right.
More than aluminum foil. Once they folded it, it was done.
And it would have been nice to have an outside activity since your floor wouldn't get all wet and children were not slipping and sliding.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been a nice one. It would have been nice to have it also on the day you had the teenagers, the volunteers, not only for you, but for them to see an activity and see how kids behave or how the control that's needed in a classroom.
Mm-hmm. And that procedure is so important in a co-teaching classroom. When we break our normal routines and procedures, like, it's a totally different environment. So not only did we break that environment because we had a STEM day, we had something they'd never seen before. It was just, there was a lot for my students.
There's a variety of solutions that could have helped not master the skill, but with the protocol of implementing a STEM day. Something we think about for the next STEM day. I don't know what that STEM day is. I don't know if we've rolled out what the next activity will be.
And I did try to stay as close to my routine. I don't know if you noticed that. Like, I try to read my books and do my vocabulary during our normal reading time. I tried to talk about the counting and technology and stuff during the math time, so it kind of seemed like we were still staying with our normal schedule, even though we weren't. I planned that strategically to try to keep things.
So for students with disabilities, or just regular students, it's best to stay as close to plan, stay on task, breakfast, bathroom breaks, routines, unpacking, not just for the students, but for the teachers, parents who are checking in, parents who are checking out, following the schedule so that the students have some similarity in their day, so having change doesn't disrupt their routine. Even those regular ed students, special ed students, could easily have a meltdown when things change. It's particularly best for students with disabilities because they get used to routines. Some have schedules, picture schedules. medications. It's best to have them all on the same schedule so that they have consistency in their day.
Right.
This didn't affect your lunch schedule or your special schedule.
It affected our specials that day, I think, because of the speakers they had that day.
That's right.
It did affect them. It wasn't off completely. It was off by like 15 or 20 minutes, but that's still a change in the day.
So is there a different solution? Could you have done it in the afternoon and like maybe done this instead of specials and compiled all this activity, all this learning in that 45-minute block and not had it spread out all over one day? Would that have been better?
Possibly. I talked with the STEM teacher about that, possibly doing it on our half days again, because the half day it was already off of routine, so the kids already knew that we weren't going to be on routine because it was an early release half day, and it didn't seem, because 5 and 6 year olds can't retain that information all day long to continue to work on the same thing. But with it being a half day, it would only be hour, 2 hours.
Ms. Warfield, please buzz the office. Dr. Williams or Ms. Warfield.
That they actually would have to retain the information for what we're doing so that they were able to complete the task in a timely manner without us repeating the same things 3 or 4 times. And she said that they would take that into consideration.
Would it be possible to have a follow-up activity? We do something here, we send something home to help reinforce the learning or retain the learning for these activities? Everybody has a bathtub. So is there something we could have extended the learning once the students got home? Not that I expect them to build boats and sink boats with pennies at home, but to involve the parents so that they know what the students learned in their STEM challenge.
We could have asked them to find 2 objects that sink and 2 objects that float. They could do that in the kitchen sink, the bathroom sink.
That's true. The students could have found the 2 objects, come back to school,
and talked about
and
it.
had more conversation, or had the conversation prior to, so when they did the activity at school, they may have had a deeper understanding of sinking and floating, or done it afterwards and come back with conversation in hopes of retaining information that they learned at school about sinking and floating. That's a good one. That would have extended their knowledge, because the extension here requires them to have seen large ships such as naval vessels, ocean liners, also vocabulary that they are not familiar with.
We did talk about them to a point. I brought pictures up. You can only go so far with pictures on the computer, but I did bring up pictures of larger ships and vessels to try to show them that boats aren't just tiny little things. We talked about different size boats and what they think might take for the larger boats to float versus, the little boats, and how the big boats stay afloat. And we tried to go down that road, but you can only do so much with pictures if it's not something they can physically see if they've never seen it before.
Right. Do you feel as if the students made a activity to real world connection with this challenge?
I don't think they completely grasped the idea. I really think that day was so long and drawn out that there was so much to retain that they didn't get it completely. Like, if we were going to do something like this, like we should have done a pre-activity at what sinks and what floats, like at your house or something, or a post so that they can come back and talk about it, because it was a one-day thing, but a lot of our kids have never left Covington, Georgia, and they don't know what a big ship is, or a naval vessel, or they've never seen one. Some of them have never even seen a little John boat, a fishing boat, so they didn't really have the background knowledge needed, and that's not something I could bring into school to show for background knowledge.
Based on our region, this is not a particularly pertinent activity. The ship